Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to this week's episode of The Feminine Frequency. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Andrea. She is a coach, she's a yoga teacher, and she is a somatic healing practitioner. And who Andrea is to me is a dear podcast listener who's been in my world for, I think, since the beginning, for like 5 years now. And so today I'm excited for you, Andrea, to share about your journey of feminine awakening, of going through your divorce, and really a lot of the insight and wisdom that you've learned along the way. And then also for us to share with our listeners what's possible when you're really devoted to this path of the feminine frequency. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. And it's been really sweet to have you in my world. You've listened to the podcast, you've come to many of my workshops, you have implemented the work. I follow you online, I get to see what you're up to in the world. And it's really beautiful to see you step into your feminine leadership. And I would love for you to start by sharing, what drew you to listening to the podcast? Where were you at 5 years ago when you started searching for this feminine wisdom?
I have goosebumps right now already. So 5 years ago, reflecting back brings up a lot of emotions, but where I was, it was 2020. COVID, everything was shut down, and I had owned a fitness studio and closed it at the time. And for the first time in my life, I was in stillness. I was by myself. I didn't have a place to go, things to do. I was home with my kids and I was forced to sit with myself. And in that process, I realized a lot of things that were not working in my life. I realized how exhausted I was, how burnt out I was, how depleted I was, and really how disconnected from myself I was. And I started to go to therapy on my own. And I just realized, the feminine, I don't know why or how, but I Googled feminine journey and your podcast. You were one of the first people that came up, and I started listening to your podcast at that time. And it felt a little uncomfortable, to be honest. It's just a lot of the things you were sharing uncomfortable, but it was like this part of me, it felt this knowing that this was what I was being pulled towards. And that was really the beginning of a lot of unraveling for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you shared that it felt uncomfortable because a lot of this work is different to what we're taught in the world, in the way that we're taught how to think, in the way that we're taught how to make decisions, how we're taught to create our life. So it makes sense that there's, discomfort, which often is, some form of fear underneath that of, oh my God, if I listen to this or if I follow this, then what's going to happen? That
Mm,
things might be different.
mhm.
So I am curious with your intuition and like that inner knowing that brought you to the podcast and that has been guiding you along the way. How has your relationship to your intuition changed over time?
Oh, so at the time, I would call myself a control freak. I was fully in my masculine. I had an eating disorder from about the time I was 13 up until my early 30s. So that shows the amount of control I was trying to have. And I got married really young. I had done a lot of personal development, but like you said, this type of work felt so different. It was mostly mindset. Again, this like driven, task oriented. If I could just force myself to change my mindset, but it felt very disembodied. And so when I started to have this inner, like there's something missing, it did feel uncomfortable. It felt a little sticky. I started following other women. And while it felt uncomfortable, there was also just this pull towards it. And it felt like ease. It just felt, while it wasn't comfortable, it also felt like a layer of something. Heaviness was being released in my life. And it also felt scary because I had this knowing that in order to step into that, there were parts of my life I was going to have to let go of and that were not going to work anymore. And I didn't know what that would mean if I started to tap into these other versions, these other parts of myself, what that would mean for my life, like the life I had built around this other version of myself.
Hmm. Yeah, that fear is so real, especially for someone who is used to being in control and is like, okay, got it all together. And now it's like, whoa, there are things about my current reality that are not in alignment or that maybe used to be in alignment that no longer are going to work moving forward. And so, like, who am I going to be without those things? Or what's going to happen if I do let go of those things? And I think that's a really important part of the journey that I talk about when I talk about, death and rebirth cycles, where
Mhm.
it's like in order to really bring forward your most authentic self, your most aligned self, we have to go through these death portals of not necessarily physically dying, but even energetically and emotionally letting go, like you said, of parts of ourselves or parts of our life that are not true to us anymore. And so, what are some of the ways of being or parts of yourself that started to be unraveled that had to
Uh,
be let go of?
the biggest one is my marriage, the dynamic in my marriage. I had been married at that time 13, 14 years. So again, I got married really young. I didn't know an adult version of myself outside of that marriage, but I had just felt this craving, this deep desire for someone to take the lead. Like I had been in my masculine, I had been in the lead in my marriage. I had been just overachieving, getting everything done. And like I said, I was exhausted and I just felt this pull, like I wanted to just let go. And in fact, at the time, and this way I just believe things manifest in our body, I had blood work done and I ended up there something was wrong with my kidneys. So I had been referred to a kidney specialist and I remember hearing, the news and I had thought and saying it now in hindsight, there was this part of me that was like, I hope there's something wrong physically so that I can just stop doing everything I'm doing to get to a point where that's the only way out. Like that's the only way to find ease, to let someone else take the lead, to let someone else be in control or to trust. That just goes to show where I was. And so for my marriage, that ultimately I feel like was the beginning of the end of my marriage. And you say death and rebirth. For me, my marriage did end up falling apart. And in that process, at the time, it was the biggest lesson gift in surrender. I resisted it for a while. I knew in my heart, but I was resisting it. And the resistance is what was so painful. And ultimately, when I let go, it was that my marriage completely fell apart, but also every version of me that was attached to it. And it was the scariest. There was so much grief and pain around it. But I also at the same time had this inner knowing that there was going to be something so beautiful on the other side if I could just let myself surrender to what was happening in my life rather than resisting it.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest fears that you had when you're in that space of that resistance where you knew that it was not the right marriage for you, that you needed to let it go, but then there was resistance in actually doing that? What were some of the fears that would maybe keep you up at night during that time?
Mm. I didn't know who I was, my identity outside of being a mom, being a wife, being, like I said, I owned a fitness studio. So showing up for other women in that aspect, I didn't know who I was. So there was a fear of not having an identity, of having to rediscover that. There was a fear of a lot of avoidance my whole life, the trauma, the things that I had avoided growing up. And I did a really good job at avoiding all of it. There was this fear of suddenly feeling it. Another fear was rage. I mentioned my therapist. When I first started going, I said to her, I feel like there is this internal rage that I have never tapped into. And I'm so afraid that if I do, it's going to take over my entire life and I won't be able to ever feel normal again. It will just consume me. And so there was that fear of feeling my emotions, of being out of control, of not being able to control them and them taking over, supporting myself, not just financially. I depended on my husband, but emotionally, I did not know how to be by myself up until the time I went through my separation. I was 40 at the time. Not that I can remember ever in my life spent a single night by myself. I was born into a big family, second of 6 kids, got married very young. I had never just spent time by myself, and my life had always felt very chaotic. So to just sit with myself scared me.
Totally understandable if you had never done that. And I think that's a very common fear for women. A lot of what you just shared, the fear of being alone, the fear of having to actually face your trauma and your feelings, the fear of who am I going to be on the other side of this if I've been known and I've known myself as a wife, as a mother, as a fitness studio owner, like who am I going to be? And those are a lot of real big fears that would of course create that resistance and that fear of letting go. You talk a lot about embracing like the highs and the lows in emotions. And once you did lean in and make this decision, tell me more about what you found with your own emotional landscape.
One, I'm a very emotional person. I'm getting emotional right now. And I did not realize that I was so out of tune with my emotions. But what I had realized is, again, I was second of 6 kids, chaotic home. And so I was always the one that had to have it all together and be the one supporting others. So the first time that I ever completely let myself fall apart and say I'm not okay was when I was going through my divorce and letting my younger sisters hold me. I had never done that. Let someone else hold me and just say I'm not okay. And what I realized in that process and everything that I had been avoiding is that grief, that pain, that sorrow. When I would let myself tap into that, the more I was able to experience joy and pleasure. And I just realized you can't numb out one emotion without numbing out the others. And that's what makes life so beautiful, is being able to experience the highs and the lows of it and embracing the lows and not resisting them. And is just being able to feel it and knowing, trusting that if you can let yourself really feel that on the other side, there's going to be something so beautiful, that the high is going to be even higher. And it's so scary if you haven't done that, but it just is like a wave. If you can, like I said, it was in the resisting it that felt so painful and so hard. But when I just let myself say, like, I'm just going to experience and let myself feel all of the grief and all of the pain. And when I came out of it, I felt like a whole new person.
Yeah, it's so interesting because what you shared about when you went to your therapist and you were like, I'm afraid that if I let myself feel angry, it's going to take over my whole life. And I don't know what to do with that. And grief is a very similar emotion. Grief is a very like overwhelming, it can be all consuming emotion as well. And what I'm hearing is that in allowing yourself to feel that and go through that, that you actually didn't get stuck there like you thought you would or like you feared you would, but it was the gateway, it was the opening, the initiation to then be able to experience more pleasure and more joy and not be stuck in that. I kind of think of it as like a volcano that is going to erupt, where it's like it's all of that energy and emotion is building and building and building and it has nowhere to go. So that's what you're walking around with in your body, is this like tension and this resistance and this, stuffing it down. But when you allow it to move and you allow yourself to feel it, like you said, it actually creates more of an opening and a softening as well.
Mhm.
So that's really beautiful that you allowed yourself to go there and to feel that.
Yeah, and the other beautiful part that has surprised me is it's not even the capacity to experience the lows and the highs, but that you can hold both simultaneously in the exact same moment together.
Yeah. Yeah. Having the capacity to hold both is huge. That a lot of people feel like, oh, it's either or. But I do feel like, especially as feminine beings, we are very cyclical in our nature, and that we do have, lots of different emotions. Even throughout a given day, we can have a range of emotions, and to allow for those to flow through us, and to be able to have capacity to be with the light and the joy, and then also to be with that grief or sadness or fear that comes up. That's really huge. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I know somewhere along the way, I can't remember what year it was, but I know that you came to take an embodiment workshop with me. And I know that a lot opened up for you in that. And I'm curious, from your experience, I know it was a long time ago, but for you, going from listening to the podcast to then actually experiencing embodiment work, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I am glad you brought this up because I just wanted to touch on it. So I do remember that workshop very clearly. And I don't know if it was right before or right after, but my same therapist, when I expressed the rage, she had encouraged me to do some rage dancing, like turn on some rage music, scream, shake. And the first time I did that, I was in my house by myself in my bedroom, door shut, and I felt so uncomfortable. I think even dancing, moving by myself felt so uncomfortable. And the first time we did that, I showed up for your embodiment workshop and there was resistance. It felt uncomfortable. It felt sticky. I felt awkward. And I just remember showing up and witnessing other women doing the same, like moving, expressing themselves. And as I started to practice those and I felt those emotions come up and out, and the first embodiment one, just the amount of the different emotions we went through in that journey, where it was from this releasing this grief, and then there was this joy, and then there was this pleasure, and then there was, this playfulness, and being able to just go through all of that. And now when I look at where I'm at now, and I'm just this fully expressed version, and the play, like go and dance and play and have fun and be fully in my body, and to be able to, when I'm feeling those stuck emotions or I need to move some rage up and out of me, being able to do that, and it just clears it out. And I feel like, it's a cycle. Usually underneath a rage, usually underneath anger, there's a much deeper emotion. And we feel this resistance. It feels sticky. Then it's like irritation. And then it turns to anger and then rage. And then if you can let yourself feel that underneath it, there's usually that grief or some sort of pain or hurt. And then after that is where you get to experience the gratitude and then the joy and the pleasure and the bliss. And it's just letting yourself move through those. That was life changing for me, to be able to realize, like, these are just emotions that I need to move out of my body. And once I do, what that's going to open up for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so beautiful to hear about your journey through that practice. And for our listeners, if you're like, I want to try an embodiment class, I'm going to include a link for a free embodiment class in the link for today's episode in the show notes, because this practice is what has allowed me to create the freedom in my life. And embodiment and somatic work is so much different than just listening to a podcast or reading books or going to therapy. It's not a cognitive processing, it's a somatic processing. So I'm going to gift you, my listeners, a free class so that you can get to experience that as well. And yeah, what you just shared, first you tried this practice in your own way to release anger in your bedroom by yourself, and then you got to experience the power of sisterhood and being in community, and being in a space that was non-judgmental, that was shame-free, that was really permission giving, because you got to see, oh, there's other women who also go through these emotions. When we look at society, a lot of times we haven't seen women express their emotions. We've often seen, women just people pleasing or putting on this perfection and pretending everything's always okay. I've got it all together. So we don't really have a lot of role models that are expressing themselves authentically or vulnerably. And so when we do have these spaces where we can see, oh, I'm not alone, and that there's other women who are being courageous in this exploration too, it opens up so much possibility for us as well.
Well, and that we're not irrational, out of control, crazy, which as women, we have been taught and we have been called. They don't know a woman that hasn't at some point in her life been called that because she has expressed herself. And so there's this fear of that, of what are people going to think? They're going to call me crazy and they're going to judge me and they're going to think I'm out of control. And so we just hold it all back. And
Mhm.
the embodiment part, you said it, you can go to therapy and talk about so much, but it just doesn't move it out of you. It's still there. And yes, I do believe in therapy. There's different things for different healing, but the movement of embodying it, of moving emotion up and out is what has been the most transformational for me personally.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing about your journey and your experience. And something you shared earlier was about, you had this fear of being alone. And I want to talk about that more because, again, I know that there are a lot of women who do fear being alone. What did you find when you got divorced and you
Mm.
have space and time for yourself?
What I found is actually how much I had craved solitude and being by myself. The first week without my kids, I was so scared. I missed them. I didn't know what to do. And the more time I spent with myself, while yes, it was hard, it was uncomfortable, there were things that came up that I knew I'd been avoiding. But for me now, I crave that solitude and that aloneness and that quiet because without it, and it's just when there's so much going on. And again, as women, we are just taught to do that, to be so busy that we can't hear what our intuition and our inner voice is telling us. If we're too busy from one thing to the next or constantly surrounding ourselves with external noise, you can't hear what your own truth is. And what I have just found is how much I needed that, how much I craved that, how much I just desire that still. And now when I don't have it and it's been a week and I haven't had that solitude or that time to myself, that's what starts to feel chaotic to me. It's like I need that time alone. And I just feel like there's just so much healing that you can do in that. And it really is the only way to your own truth is you have to learn to sit with yourself and to learn to appreciate and love yourself. And when I went through my divorce, it was about 8 to 9 months that I didn't date. I didn't, very made an intentional decision. At first I said, I'm going to go 3 months. And then it just felt so good that I wanted to go longer. And I feel like had I not done that and I just would have jumped back into dating, I would have been seeking all the external validation, all the things that what I really need was to learn to source that from myself so that when I was ready for a partnership relationship, I wasn't seeking that. We could come into relationship as a mutual, I'm a whole person. I'm not here to get anything. It's just me showing up in love. And that it took a lot of time with myself to get to that point.
Yeah, I really commend you for taking that space and time. And I highly recommend it for anyone who's going through a separation or a divorce to gift yourself that time in between relationships to come home to yourself because no matter what the landscape of the relationship is, there are always ways, unless you've done a lot of work, but where you are going to lose parts of yourself and where there's some healing that gets to
Mm.
happen before you actually are ready for a healthy relationship with another sovereign whole being. So I
Mm.
really love that you dedicated that time for yourself, especially after such a long marriage that you were in and so much that you were letting go of. It seems like you really created the space to come home to yourself and to really get to know who you are as this version of yourself.
Yeah, and learning what I want, just to know what my real deep desires are and who and how I want to show up in the world without an attachment to someone else.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I want to talk about relationships in just a moment and dating after divorce. But before we go there, I think an important piece that I'd love for you to share is, as a mom going through the divorce and making the decision to end your marriage, I imagine that there may have been fears around how it would impact your kids. And so for women who are listening who may be in a similar space or who are afraid that it's going to impact their kids, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That's something I hear a lot from moms that have been in this in between is they stay because out of fear that they're going to, and a lot of times the wording is ruin my kid's life, destroy their life. And we've just put so much power in the whole till death do us part. For me is, it's like we will stay in a relationship where we are slowly dying, where we are abandoning ourselves in a tiny, minute way over and over thousands of times and say that that's success because we've been taught that the longer you're together is success. And for, I guess, the women listening is that your kids are watching and we are teaching them what a healthy relationship means, a healthy relationship with ourselves, and realizing I don't want to raise kids that are abandoning themselves in order to make other people happy. Like I want to raise kids who will speak their truth, who know their own needs, who are willing to voice them, who will stand up for themselves, who will fight for what is best for them and for their own happiness. And how could I do that if they're watching me as their mom make myself small, abandon myself over and over again? And they're going to be okay. Getting divorced doesn't mean it's a broken home, and it doesn't mean that you don't have two parents that still love you, because it is possible. And I know you can't control how your partner reacts to that, but you can control how you show up for your kids. So if you just continue to show up with love and be an example of how to love yourself, that's the best lesson that you can give your kids.
I love that so much. I personally, as you know, went through my own divorce and it was in my late 20s and we didn't have kids. So there wasn't that additional layer of responsibility and of that internal process that I had to go through. So I'm really glad that you spoke to that. And I think that will be really supportive for a lot of women. And yeah, it's about being a leader and a role model for yourself and for your kids to show up from that place of self-love. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know that you've been exploring a romantic partnership for quite some time now. I can't remember exactly how long you've been in your relationship, but I'd love for you to share like life after divorce, after taking that time for yourself to connect with yourself and getting out there dating again. What was that like for you?
It was scary first, and I had a lot of resistance to it. I spent that time right when I was going through my divorce. I started dating and learned a lot in that process. And that's when I realized I need to spend some time by myself. And so coming out of that, I was very intentional. I knew what I wanted in a partnership. I knew what I wanted in a man, how I wanted him to be showing up in the world, how I wanted to feel in the relationship. And I was very clear about that. So when I made the decision to start dating and realized I do want a partner, and I was super resistant to that just because of what I had been through. But when I finally said, I do want a partner, I'm going to put myself out there. And I feel like when we do that and we trust, the universe just starts to align the breadcrumbs. And I am dating someone. Yes. And it has been over a year. We are long distance, and I just feel like it was divine timing. And we met online and started to show up for each other. And he is on his own journey and has done a lot of work. He shows up as a leader, and I feeling safe in his presence, being able to express myself and all of my emotions and not feeling judged, not feeling like he's trying to fix them, being able to show up in love without this attachment to the other person, and knowing still, yes, I want to be with you and I am okay without you. I am okay on my own. And it has just been, it's a relationship that I didn't know was possible, that I at one point had dreamed about, had felt, but I just didn't think it existed. And I also know that I wouldn't have found it had I not spent that time on my own doing the work for myself before I put myself out there for that.
So inspiring. I think many women are like, oh, but it's too late, or I'm too old, or there's no good men out there, or
Mm.
whatever, all the stories, right? And so I think it's very, very important for women to see examples of what's possible. And then also to come from that place of deep sovereignty of like, I will be okay if this relationship isn't till the end of time. And like this relationship is adding to my life and we're learning and growing together. And I love witnessing you in that and that you were able to open your heart and courageously put yourself out there again after going through your divorce.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to touch on it is the amount of growth. Yes, that time and solitude alone is necessary. And there are parts, and I just believe we are here to be in relationship. We are here to connect. And there are just things that you cannot grow or learn from until you are in relationship and you feel like, I had felt like I've done it. I've done the work, I'm healed. And then suddenly you're in relationship and it's this mirror. And it's really just an opportunity again to dig deeper, to peel back the next layer of that healing of who you are and getting curious about that. And so that it is just a gift.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a different type of growth when you're learning in relationship. And the fact that you took that time to be with yourself before this, like you said, it prepared you to be
Mhm.
ready to do this work with your partner. Yeah.
Mhm.
If you could go back and tell the version of you in 2020 during COVID and letting go of your fitness studio and starting to, question your marriage, if you could give her a message or tell her something, what would you tell her?
Stop resisting, and trust that small nudge.
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. And I trust that your journey unfolded how it was supposed to, because I know that now as a coach, you support other women with that decision. Should I stay or should I leave?
Mhm.
And I want you to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with your clients who are in this space of deciding whether they're meant to stay in their marriage or whether they're meant to leave.
Mm. Yeah, for me, it's just so important. And when I was going through it, I wish that I had seen that. I felt really alone. And the reason why we get so stuck in that indecision or the back and forth is again because we're so disconnected from ourselves. And there's all of these shoulds and attachments and expectations and beliefs and programming about what it means to get divorced. Again, that, the failure, that getting divorced means that you're a failure or it's a failed marriage and all those stories. So working with women, and a lot of the work is returning to themselves, is those embodiment practices, is learning to sit with yourself so that you can start to hear your own truth and your intuition, and being able to hold your emotions and to move them through your body, because the only person that has the answer is yourself. I don't have the answers. It's just uncovering that truth so that you can make that decision. So that's a lot of what I do, is all those things that I was so scared to do when I was going through my divorce is, yes, making space, slow down, stop saying yes to things that are really a no, start learning to trust your intuition, and the difference between fear and intuition. As women, we know, but again, we've just been so programmed to really trust anyone other than ourselves and other than our bodies. So it takes time to learn to do that again when you have spent a lifetime looking outside of yourself. So it's those small ways of doing that and helping them to uncover their own truth of what they already know, and just learning to trust it.
Yeah, I love how you describe that. And I love the work that you're doing with your clients. And I know that, since you've been through this experience and have the embodied wisdom, the lived experience, along with your professional training, that, women who are going through the same process know that they're not alone. And also to be guided through these different tools and learning how to listen to themselves. We're not taught this, like you said, in school. We're not taught this as adults. This is really the deeper wisdom that is the feminine wisdom in a lot of ways that is so important and so essential to help women to reclaim their power and to come home to themselves themselves. And, the last piece that I'll share is I think that it takes a lot of courage for women to reach out and say, hey, I'm ready for support, because I think similar to where you're at, there's a knowing, oh, something might change, something likely
Mm.
will change if I say yes. And what I want to share with any women who, are considering working with Andrea, or who are in my space and are considering reaching out for coaching and mentorship for me, is that the choice to receive mentorship is, again, not about the outcome, and it doesn't mean that you have to do anything you don't want to do. It's really a journey of getting to know yourself and know what you want and what you need, and deep listening to these inner whispers of your soul. And the only outcome on the other side of that that's possible is freedom. It's like you no longer will be in this space of second guessing and self-doubt, and in the space of resistance, like you're talking about, Andrea. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm so excited for all the women who get to learn from you and get to work from you. And for our listeners who want to stay connected with you after they listen to this podcast, where is the best place for them to find you?
The best place is on Instagram, and it's at reclaim_rise. But that's mostly, yeah, where I am and the best way to stay connected.
Beautiful. We'll include that in the show notes. And if you want to connect with Andrea, go on over, follow her, and send her a message to let her know, yeah, any parts of her story that resonate for you. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to have you here in the feminine frequency community, and want to celebrate you for saying yes to being here and coming on the podcast today.
And thank you. Thank you for having me. I've loved our conversation.
Truly a pleasure.